talk a lot about balance, wellness, and self-improvement, but rarely about integration. What if the goal isn't to do more, but to become whole? Welcome to Centered, Becoming Whole in a Chaotic World. This is a podcast about orientation, integration, and the lifelong work of becoming whole. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, a Ph.D. exercise physiologist with a deep interest in the intersection of the physical and the spiritual. My guest is Dr. Julie Merriman, Ph.D., a counselor educator, licensed clinician, speaker, and author. Dr. Merriman has spent over 2 decades working in counseling, clinical supervision, higher education, and professional development, with a focus on women in high responsibility roles, particularly healers, helpers, and leaders navigating burnout and compassion fatigue. She is the author of In Pursuit of Soul Joy, a 12-week guide for overcoming burnout and compassion fatigue, and the forthcoming book, Are We Gonna Have Sex or What?, which explores desire, intimacy, and erotic shutdown in midlife through a nervous system-informed lens. Well, Dr. Merriman, welcome to Centered. It's my pleasure to have you on the podcast. Why don't we start with having you just tell a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got into the wellness area.
Sure. Well, and thank you. And I'm delighted to be here with you, Jeff. I've been a clinician for about 30 years where I've had my own private practice at various times. I've done everything from running psych units, which that was fun, to being a professor, which I've done that for a number of years. But I got into the field because really in Fort Worth, Texas, where I grew up, in 7th grade at Leonard Middle School, we had this class. It was an experimental campus. Fort Worth is kind of in trouble now, but back then they had a really good school system. And I was on this experimental campus, and we had a class called careers class. And that's where I learned about this thing called a counselor. And my parents, my mom had just run off with a rock band, true story, and had left me with my daddy. And I was really going through a time where thinking, man, I wish I had someone to talk to like that. So that was my entry into this field many, many years ago, and I've loved it. And I'm also a registered play therapist as well as a licensed professional counselor. So, excuse me, as I've aged, my clientele has aged, if you will. So now I really work with. I'm 63. I work with women over 50 or any woman. I mean, I have younger women too, but really trying to help them get that nervous system regulated through my research. And dude, I wish I'd had it when my kids were little, knowing how to regulate my nervous system. But through my research, I really realized all these theories we have are fabulous, but we've got to get people embodied somatically before we can really start working on stuff. And the nervous system kind of gives me a guide there.
Yeah, exciting stuff. And we'll dive into that. And I think that, getting the nervous system in line is very much in line, bad phrasing of sentence there, in regards to, centered. Our nervous system is really that control center that helps us get on path. So before we kind of get into your work, take us back for a moment. Was there a point in your life when things began to clarify for you, when you started to see what really mattered?
Yes, that was the great crash and burn of my early 40s and my first book is about that. But yeah, I had started life a little late. So I'm always embarrassed to say this, but it's true. I got married when I was 16. It's not a Texas thing. It was a dysfunctional family thing. Not married to that person anymore. But I was told I was stupid and incapable and really had an experience with some emotional abuse, if you will. But so all that to say, by the time I hit college, I was probably 25, and I felt like I was behind. I felt like all my peer mates were ahead of me, and I had to catch up. And so I set about, I was taking 24-hour semesters, holding 3 jobs and raising 2 children and wondering, what's wrong? Why did I feel this way? But by the time I hit my early to mid 40s, to look at me, I was successful. I'd hit all the markers. I was running programs. But I realized, in fact, I'd given a keynote speech and I'd come off stage and it was a standing ovation. I had prepared for months, for this, and came off stage and I felt numb. I remember thinking, is this it? Why did I kill myself for this? There's got to be something else. I was so ungrounded and so dysregulated. That's where I really started my journey to clarify and get grounded and make sure my priorities were my priorities, not some false schema that I had created and I was running towards.
So you are the perfect guest for this podcast. So one of the themes of the podcast is fragmentation, and you work primarily with women. So I think today in this episode, we'll kind of focus on fragmentation and orientation in women in particular. Where do you see women becoming most divided and disoriented today?
It starts with being disembodied. I work with, and I also do a lot of marriage counseling too. But so I love men. I bring them into the mix, but I see a lot of women being these beautiful floating heads of competence. They have no idea where their body is. They're just, we're going to think our way through this. And they serve and they serve and they serve. There's this myth that we can't pour from an empty cup. And I said, yes, we do it all the time. And we become that empty cup. So they're walking around empty, not understanding that. And I do a lot of chakra psychology. I mean, I'm a yoga instructor too. And I feel like with chakras, if I'm a neuroscientist, I'm talking to you about the polyvagal system. If I'm a yoga instructor, I'm talking to you about the chakras. Same thing, different language. So I try to help my ladies as they get embodied, just to understand where those energy centers are. It's your vagus nerve running through your body, but it gives me a point of reference that looks a little different than just spaghetti thrown on an anatomy chart.
Yeah.
But she's so busy giving, and her little amygdala, that almond part of her brain, is scanning the environment for what other people need. Our nervous system is doing its job, but she kicks into the sympathetic state, fight or flight, or the dorsal vagal state, where she's just completely numb and has no idea that she's living there. That functional freeze, she thinks this is just how life feels. And I think that has a big part of that fragmentation, because she can't access her whole self. She's giving and giving and giving. In fact, I work with a lot of gals, and not just gals. I see it in some of the husbands as well, but they swallow their truth to keep the peace. And that ends up with a lot of resentment because your needs aren't getting met. And then she's ashamed, and she's like, shouldn't have that feeling, feels guilty. So, man, that stress cycle is just is it the chicken or the egg?
I love that you're bouncing back and forth between the vagus nerve and chakras, because it really underscores, I talk in terms of wellness. A friend of mine from high school kind of identified that I always speak in the same pattern. I say spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social. And he's like, that spells out SPIES. And I'm like, I wasn't aware of that. So we now have this, what we call the SPIES model, but I describe it as more of a pyramid where, we have at the base the spiritual and the physical. And so when you talk about like chakras and the vagus nerve, it is really kind of pulling together this idea of, the physical nervous system, but also the energies of our body. They're all interconnected. And then we build off of that intellectually and emotionally to kind of get to that pinnacle of what would be the social piece. Right. And I'm really starting to realize even more that when we get to the pinnacle of that social piece, that's where we start looking at true love, connection, community, and all those types of things. And so for years, we've always kind of depicted the wellness model as this pie that, we have to divide up the pieces and try and keep them even. But to me, it's much more of that pyramid that's building toward good, healthy social connections, and, kind of our interconnectedness in the universe. And so I love when you start talking chakras in the vagus nerve, because you're in my lane in both ways, So
I
love
it's great. That. Well, you can't separate it. And I'm picturing Maslow's pyramid as you're talking, that self-fulfilled, evolved person. But we cannot, you can't separate that stuff. You just cannot live segmented like that. We're, to be in that ventral state, where that's our social place. That's where pleasure comes back online. That's where we we feel fully alive. Hell, you might have spontaneous joy one day, when you're in that state.
Yeah.
But when and I think our wellness industry, and I'm going to give it a big hug, but I think that I I used to talk about self care all the time, but I feel like it's a bit gaslighting. And we have a wellness industry that is making a gazillion dollars off of us. Here, do this, here, buy this, without really getting to the root of what's going on. And I find the beautiful souls I work with will say, I did get a massage. I am taking 5 minutes to do this, that, or the other. So they feel shamed or blamed that, oh, well, my self care isn't working. What am I doing wrong? But if we're in that functional freeze state, which I call just completely, you're going all the time, you're living on a cocktail of adrenaline and cortisol. You get some dopamine hits from helping, but your dopamine receptors are completely confused because they don't even understand what they're supposed to be doing anymore. Of course. And you do take that extra nap, but you don't ever feel rested. That really is a signal that your nervous system, as I lived it, is fried.
Yeah.
Absolutely fried. And self-care, it's beyond that. I used to think of self-care, and I think I put it in my first book, but as we treat it like that, you build a beautiful, remember sundaes? I used to love hot fudge sundaes when I was little, and they'd put that cherry on top. And a lot of people treat self-care, taking care of themselves, holding space for any kind of wellness, as that cherry on top, and it can't be. It has to be the base of what we're doing. The very base.
And you mentioned Maslow too, and I heard it twice recently that he, in his final days, was regretting the fact that he put at the top of the pyramid self-actualization when it should have been, in fact, transcendence, I think is how he felt it should have been. And it's like, that is so true. And I wish that he had corrected that pyramid before he passed away, because I think that's where we're really driving at.
Well, and doesn't that follow the chakra system? I mean, you've got your root chakra.
Very much so, yeah.
And then if you go to the where he wanted to put it, that's your crown chakra. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So we got to keep changing the patterns here a little bit. And you kind of mentioned the wellness model in our society of, really just being much more of a commercialized type of system. Where do you see modern culture working against women flourishing in today's society?
I'm 63. I entered my career in the 80s, where a lot of times I was the only woman in the room. And now in 2026, a lot of, especially as a counselor, there are no men in the room. I mean, it's there might be one or two as you work into the Ph.D. level, but I think it really comes from so my invitation there is that I think society is really trying to even the playing field. I don't like that word, but that's all that's coming to my little pea brain right this moment, to give her opportunities to be in the boardroom. But I think it comes more from ancestral DNA, old traumas perhaps not being worked through, the culture of the family we're raised in. And I see this a lot. My daddy, he was born in 1936. He was an amazing engineer for Bell Helicopter, but and we learned this from our families, and he had a very low tolerance for any emotion that wasn't happy. So if I cried, I will give you something to cry about, Julie Elizabeth. Come here. I'm like, but I'm not the only person with that experience. I think that it's how we're socialized through our families, perhaps, into what is expected of women, or maybe what we've learned, because I learned very early, if I appeased and pleased, I'm a recovering people pleaser, I would not be kicked out of the tribe. Now, I mean, that's a primitive feeling, but it's real. It's with us. No one's going to kick me out of the tribe, but I would be rewarded. And then I got into school, and if I made an A, I was rewarded. And if I volunteered to do this, that, or the other, I was rewarded. So I think we really get socialized to please and appease by giving of ourselves. And I don't know, maybe it has something to do with our estrogen markers where, we carry the children, we are responsible for keeping them alive. It's a big responsibility, and holding our families together. And at work, we're holding the boardroom together there in the C-suite. And, it's not individual. These are a lot of things you're doing in one day. And then we get those dopamine hits. So we're kind of addicted to that busy, busy, busy. And we don't know how to slow down and how to go, let me let go of that. My husband, we've been together a little over 35 years. He's amazing. He is, we live on a Texas cattle ranch. He was Texas state trooper, drives his tractor, this epitome of this man. But he is the most in touch with his feminine energy than any man I've ever met. He is so gentle. And he would see I'd be busy, so he's starting to do the laundry and cooking dinner. And my female part is like, that's my job. Am I not doing it right? You know what? I really had to retrain myself to allow that space. But I know I'm not the only woman who had that experience. Like, what's wrong with me that you don't think I can do that? God love him. I'm cool with it now, just so you know. And I kind of blab it around there. Draw me back in.
So, we're just talking about kind of what culturally is keeping women from flourishing. And you've touched on it a bit. I think sometimes, we want to blame outside of culture and making things difficult for women, but sometimes women make it more difficult for themselves because you're in this position where you're trying to be successful in your career. You want to be successful at home with your children. You want to be successful with your husband or your partner. And we want to run around. It's almost like we expect we have to run around with that empty, and pouring from an empty cup, as you called it.
Yeah.
And my wife was the same way. I give her a hard time anytime she doesn't stop to let me open the car door for her. I'm like, what did I do wrong? Because that's usually when she's pissed at me, she would just go and get in the car by herself. But it took me the first few years of our marriage to say, look, that's part of my showing you that I care is opening the door. And when you don't allow me to do it, it takes away from that opportunity for me. And I think it was one of our first dates. She was basically saying that, if something about, or I think I said to her, if you're looking for a guy that's going to be able to buy you a BMW and Mercedes or whatever, I'm not the one. And she's like, well, I can do that for myself. I don't need you for that. And because she still makes more money than me. She married a professor. I married a sales executive. So I made out. Yeah. So I think that might be part of it. And so personally, what spiritual practices do you have that have become most formative in your life that enable you to kind of keep more unified, keep more oriented?
My greatest spiritual piece, and it may not seem like that off the top, but is my exercise time, the time I allow for my exercise, where I'm able to leave everything going on and just connect with something greater than me. And it my brain turns off. It's a great thing. I find that to be very spiritual for me. We live 3 miles down a dirt road in a town of 1,000 people at the top of the hill country in Texas. It's beautiful out here. So I have 4 blue healers that work the cattle, but wow. Taking my blue healers back, and we've got about 1,000 acres, so taking them back through the pastures and just being, I can't always do it barefoot because we have things called stickers that hurt, but that grounds me. My deep breathing while I'm out in that pasture, just looking at the trees, listening to the rustle of the leaves. And we have so many songbirds around. I've got to get back to nature. I've got to get back to nature. So those are very grounding. The last piece would be, when we go in the Polaris to check the cattle, I love to watch the little calves running around and bucking, and it's wonderful. I like to do a walking meditation more than a sitting meditation. For me, that just works better. And it's probably because I was in functional freeze for so many years, and that frontal lobe was like, we're not meditating, sister. You got to be moving. But I mean, meditation looks so different. There's just not one way to do it, but I really like the walking meditation.
And I think, again, it goes back to bringing that spiritual and the physical together, that they're not totally separated, that you need both, and to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And so this would probably be a pretty good question in regards to women in particular, but what does modern culture misunderstand about the body in flourishing?
That we have to almost die before we pull the brake and go, I can't do it, man. I'm setting a boundary here. That badge for being busy, that needs to go. And I think that still is a misnomer. Again, I came into my career in the 80s, where I don't know if you remember that commercial where she can fry up the bacon, bring home the, because I'm a woman. Yeah. That's BS. We can't be those super women, and we beat the heck of it out of ourselves if we feel like we're failing our expectation. And you're right. 9 times out of 10, it is our expectation that is kicking our butt, not what someone has said to us. It's what we're assuming and thinking and pushing ourselves towards. So, I think it's very important. Now, I've got a 16-year-old granddaughter, and she's doing things different. She's doing things a little bit different. And I know that my son and my lovely daughter-in-law have raised her a little differently than even how I raised my children. But society has to accept that there's a limit. But I think it really falls within the individual. At 63, I'm like, no. I don't care anymore. I just don't care anymore. And I know that's because, I take my hormones, but I know that's an estrogen thing. We had lots, when we are rich and full of estrogen, it's not just reproduction. It runs our brain, and it helps us tolerate things that we should not be tolerating. I do not have that problem anymore. It's freeing. It's been a homecoming. I got to excavate myself and really add things into my life that I want to add. And every woman can do that. It's just a little scary, but we have to check what we're expecting of ourselves.
I'm 63 as well. So, I'm on the male side of that generation. And I think you're right that our generation of females have probably had it the hardest.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess you can go back and say, well, wait a minute. No, the pioneer women had it pretty hard themselves. But, from a standpoint of the amount of self-inflicted stress, societal stress, familial stress that is all put on women, that much of it is avoided, but women were raised not to avoid that. And the generation of competition where it's like, I got to keep up with the ladies next to me, and I can't let up, and they're looking the same way. It's kind of like running a sprint. You're looking out of the corner of your eye, you want to stop, but that person next to you is like breathing down your neck, and they're looking at you like they want to stop, but they can't because of you.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for women. I'm so impressed by. I have a daughter. It's just turned 18, and her generation is very, very different.
Yeah.
And it's great that they're a little bit more, adjusted in certain ways. There are other ways that they're not so well adjusted.
Their brains are developing.
Yeah. But they're not pressuring themselves like our generation did.
Well, and we did. I was not only competing with women, I was competing with men, trying to prove something. And then and I've alluded to it, but I hadn't said it outright. So often for women, our value is tied to how we perform. And that's a real cross to bear, if you will, to convince yourself, no, I'm valuable for what I am. Back to my father, and he was wonderful, but I would think, if I earn this degree, will he love me? If I earn this degree, Daddy loved me in his own way, regardless. But when I did get my Ph.D., he was like, well, I'm so proud of you, but why in the hell would you get it in counseling? That's the most ridiculous degree. But those little, I mean, those are things that I grew up with. I mean, I'm not beating up on my daddy. He did the best he could, but our, we get messages as we grow up. And then we internalize those. And if you look at Adler's theory, if kids don't fully understand what's going on, we're going to make up a story about what's going on. And then that becomes fact, even if it's not. So there was probably quite a bit of that for not me, but I would say probably some folks in our generation, because our parents didn't sit down and talk to us about our feelings and talk to us about adult things. My daddy used to say, maybe you heard this, I still didn't make sense to me, little pitchers have big ears. So they would go away and talk about things away from the kids. So anyway, that's I think it's a different day for this new generation. They get to talk about feelings and get to express and all the things.
And so you're an academic too. So, there's the intellectual piece that goes beyond kind of even the emotional and the spiritual side of things. And so as you look at studying in your field in counseling, and is it more of a psychology counseling, or is it just counseling in general? But
it's KCREP, which is what accreditation I'm going through right now. They really separate social work, counseling, psychology. We all have our own beat, if you will. So it's counseling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So as an academic, what ideas do you think most distort human flourishing today? And particularly, again, focusing on women.
Yeah. Well, I think back to your values tied to what you do, that's a pretty hard, no, you're valuable just for being you. And the belief or the expectation women have of doing it all, and then here's the thing. Here's something, and this, I don't know if it's a cultural piece, but here's what I really work with women on. We have to know what we need. We have to be able to ask for that. And those are two things, like I'll say, well, what do you need? Hell, I don't know. I've never even thought about it. Being able to ask and knowing just because we ask doesn't mean it's going to be a yes, but there's something very valuable for our psyche and our nervous system to ask and empower ourselves with those words. And then be able to accept that help. And that's where I find, even if I can get her to do those first two things, there's some kind of then I'm failing if I accept the help. And that couldn't be further from the truth. But I find that very interesting. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing. I don't know.
So what practices do you teach that help your clients and the women you work with to better regulate their inner lives?
Well, we start with just a full body scan. I want to get her back embodied. And I tell you what, Jeff, to have her, I'll go, okay, now scan here. And she's like, she does not want to go back in that body. She does not. And I'll say, well, she might say, I'm really anxious. Okay, where are you feeling that in your body? Damn it, Julie. She doesn't want to go there. She wants to stay out of that body. So it takes, and I just your listeners to hold some space and self-compassion and curiosity. It's okay. There's no wrong way to do it, but we have to start doing it so we can just get on this path of being in a different place. So very first and foremost, that full body scan with curiosity and self-compassion. And if that's a new term, there's a professor at University of Texas, Kristen Neff. She has a great website all about self-compassion. She's written a couple of books on it. But that's being nice to yourself. I don't know if you've experienced this with your wife or with yourself, but we can be so mean to ourselves and just beat ourselves up for just little things. Oh my God, I was late to that appointment. I'm the biggest dumbass on earth. Oh my, when it's like, no, world is continuing to turn. It's okay. Those thoughts dysregulate our nervous system. Those thoughts can dump cortisol, so self-compassion, curiosity, full body scan. It's the very first place we're going to start. And I know it sounds simple, but that takes some time.
And how does that translate then into our relationships? What does real community, real connection in our relationships require?
Presence, being embodied. It's very hard to connect with another person when it's an empty shell. Um, that presence is very important. And when his or her nervous system is dysregulated, and that frontal lobe, our brain is very selfish with energy. Frontal lobe is not fully available when we're dysregulated, and your your body is going, okay, sister, you don't need pleasure. If that saber-toothed tiger's chasing you, we're not reproducing. So pleasure goes, desire goes. You've got to get regulated and embodied for that connection to even be possible.
So what should sit at the center of a well-lived life?
What should sit at the center of a well-lived life? You. An embodied you. Taking the time to get yourself embodied. I have, and at this point in my life, I recognize when I'm dysregulated. I used to not. I just thought that was how life was, just running around with your hair on fire, hitting up against the wall, chicken with your head cut off. I now realize, like right now, I'm in a dysregulated state because I have so much responsibility going on. I'm worried I want my faculty to keep their jobs. I want my students to get their degrees. But I recognize that, and I'm able to ask for what I need. Earlier, I'd asked my husband, can you just hug me for 5 minutes, please? A little oxytocin got released into my system. That's our love hormone. That's a great way to regulate immediately. So what's sitting at the center is us with self-awareness, because without that self-awareness, we can be just a big blob, sitting in the middle of our life. But through self-awareness, I think we're able to move into the ability to get ourselves more regulated.
So what does regulation really mean? I mean, if if somebody listening saying, well, how do I know if I'm well regulated?
Yeah, such a good question. I wish I could put them in my body right now and they would know this is not a well-regulated body. You have space. When you're dysregulated, like my husband could touch me and I might be irritated, like, God, one more thing, we're not having sex. What do you mean? And he's like, chick, I was just touching you. Yeah, it's that feeling of one more thing. I have no capacity for one more thing. I can't even imagine loading the dishwasher right now. I'm taxed. Pleasure has gone offline. Desire has gone offline. Just, you feel numb. You don't even feel like you're living your life. And you're uptight. I mean, I'll have a lot of people squeeze their shoulders and then drop, and they're like, "Oh hell, I didn't even realize, I was so uptight." But we tense when we're in that state, and pelvic floor is tensed as well, which doesn't help with pleasure. But when you're regulated, there's space. There's capacity to think about more difficult things and not think, there's space. And like I said, spontaneous joy might come up. Like, well, hell, where did that even come from? You feel safe to be in your body. And when you're really dysregulated, that root chakra is very unbalanced and you don't even feel safe in your own body.
So you talked about exercise and getting outdoors and the things that help you kind of center a little bit more. Are there any other habits that have most transformed your life?
Yeah. Learning to say no as a complete sentence and not thinking, because my nervous system, and I told you I was raised as a pleaser, and my nervous system honestly believed I was going to die if I set a boundary. You're going to die, Julie. So I'd get a stomach ache and start sweating, and no, that's a false belief. And a boundaried life is has been just an absolute gift. And I've been able to create a life that is so full of things that bring me joy. The boundary is naturally set. I look at that and go, there's no joy in that. I'm not doing that. Yeah. And I don't sweat and get a tummy ache and all the things.
So let's bring up your book for a little bit here. You have a forthcoming book. Are we going to have sex or what?
Yeah, it's actually here. It's actually here.
Okay.
Now, but
So that's a provocative title. Tell us a little bit about the book and how it explores desire, intimacy. Who's it written for?
Yeah.
Because who's asking the question, are we going to have sex or what?
Yeah, well, it was me. That was my husband. I asked my husband that on our first date, actually.
Okay.
And he, as I was working on the book, he said, that might be a good title. It is for women over 50, or really any woman. I think there's something in there. And even her partner would probably get some good stuff out of this. It's about nervous system regulation, getting desire back online, reclaiming your body, because we have we've left it for so long, so we can live fully alive. So there's a few spicy things in there, but really I use my radiance model through the book. It's just about helping her remove shame, because there's as we age, we can be very mean to ourselves. Our bodies change, how we respond changes, and the book is really trying to normalize that and give some paths to get her regulated. And I even have some scripts in there, because as I've done marriage counseling over the 30 years, I've always been surprised, because sex always comes up. I mean, that sex and money, which always goes down to communication. But I was always surprised when I had couples who'd been married 10, 15, 20 years and didn't talk about sex. Well, that's very telling. Let's understand that. And there was shame around the conversation and not wanting to hurt someone's feelings. But it's uber important. You have to have those conversations. That's part of that connection. Now, I talk about in the book, let's do it dressed and maybe at the kitchen table instead of naked on the bed, where we don't want anyone to get their feelings hurt or blamed. But having those intimate, vulnerable conversations are very important. And as I said, when we're in that functional freeze, our pleasure comes offline. We've been braced for so many years. That's your pelvic floor bracing. Then we say, do Kegels, and your genitals are like, I just need some blood, man. I'm getting no blood here. So, trying to soften her responses, help him understand how at 50, only about 10 to 15% of women have spontaneous desire where they might wake up horny. That's not common. Most women, 90 to 85%, rely on spontaneous desire in a context. And as you get older, it's still there, but it's layered under a lot of years, cumulative years of all this responsibility, where an obligatory sex, faking orgasms, where your body's like, I don't even know what you want anymore. I don't understand. So helping her to get desire back online might take a hot minute. So for the partner to understand, whereas in her 20s, maybe, it came online a lot quicker. As we age, it's going to take a hot minute. Foreplay might need to last longer. Maybe it starts with sexting in the morning and hand holding at lunch, and, just a more purposeful, prolonged kind of thing. But it's still there.
I had a guest on my other podcast, kind of speaking from the men's side, and it never really occurred to me that for women, once they hit menopause, that desire generally drops off, especially once they have kids and things like that, and that it's sometimes the men that have the greater desire. I was thinking, the old guys, start seeing erectile dysfunction and just,
Right.
hormones dropping, that there's less desire, but it's actually quite the opposite. And that's why, so many divorces happen in the 50s and 60s, because the woman isn't really is interested, and the husband goes chasing after,
Yeah.
younger skirts, and, it ends the relationship. So how, from both sides, what do women need to be doing? What do men need to be doing to facilitate this better? You talked about kind of sitting down fully clothed at the table. Are there some good practices? One thing that my wife and I do, and I initiated this, I don't know how many years ago. I call it our 15-minute check-in, because we're just constantly going. Into the time my kids were, in school, we had sports and everything else. It's like, we just need to take 15 minutes every day, sit down, have a glass of wine or a beer. We've kind of moved away from the alcohol piece, and it's like now a cup of tea, trying to kind of, age our bodies a little bit more effectively. But we want to have that, 15 minutes just to kind of what's going on. And I get frustrated with my wife because all the time she just wants to talk about work. I had this meeting and that meeting today, and it's like, I care, but I really don't care.
Yeah.
Where can we be vulnerable here? What do we need to do?
Yeah. And I appreciate that question.
Mhm.
I think for women in their 50s and 60s, I think the desire has been so buried that she just gives up. She just gives up. And she very much needs to feel seen and loved for that to even come back online. And chances are, I deal with this a lot. We have roommate marriages by the time they get to 50 or 60. You're very wise to have done, hey, let's have 15 minutes to connect, because they get to, the kids have left. She looks across the table, or he doesn't go, you? I don't know you anymore. Damn sure not going to bed with you. You know what? And maybe they're even in separate bedrooms by now. So there's a lot of resentment that needs to be resolved in long-term relationships. And it's not, there's nothing, I think of resentment as a very sacred emotion. We want to shame ourselves for it and say we shouldn't have it. But if you will get in touch with it, it's going to tell you what you need. And help you understand how to release some of that so you can maybe get back to that relationship. But I thought you were going to say something that.
Nope.
So, it's multiple layered, right? It's not just one and done. And you're far better off if you can work through it. And the grandkids just have one set of grandparents, because you're going to have to share. You're going to have to share forever if you go the other way during those ages. But long-term intimacy, let's say we get her back regulated, and I'm telling you, there's juice in that regulation, and she needs hormones. I see a great guy to get my hormones. Everyone needs their hormones. But you've got to remember, in long-term relationships, novelty is very important. And a lot of times it's gone out the door, or it's asleep on the back porch smoking a cigarette going, this is boring as hell. I'm not even interested in you people anymore. Novelty isn't just about a new sex position hanging from the ceiling. If you do that, stretch at our age. You need to stretch. You do that. But
Yep.
novelty is about finding excitement in the relationship still. Like my hubby and I just got back from a big trip in Spain where I had all kinds of novel experiences. We're experiencing that together, and that we co-regulate. That's very important. We co-regulate. We get those mirror neurons involved, and it brings some spice back into the relationship, because when you look at desire, it's got to have some novelty in there. It's got to have a little spice. And yeah, it's the ritual you spoke of, were just 15 minutes a day, whatever it might be, but that's something I assign to couples. Kelly and I, regardless, and when he was state trooping full time, you never knew what the schedule was, but we always have our coffee together. We lay in bed, we have coffee, we pet the cat, because she thinks she's be the big middle of everything, and we connect for the day. What are you doing today? Here's a trick that we counselors use, because you can't say just fine. What was the best thing that happened today? What was the worst thing that happened today? That open-ended sentence, but those are important to check in. He needs to feel connected. She needs to feel connected. Now, layering in, I just came through breast cancer. My husband just came through brain cancer.
Oh, wow.
concurrently. In fact, I was teasing, but I accused him of unprotected sex, giving me the cancer, but not true. That's just a joke. But you have to factor in that at our age, health issues start coming up, so, and that's a real, that's a real different layer to that. But coming out on the other side, if you stay connected. I might have my couple sit back to back and regulate their breathing, feeling their chest going in and out, hold hands, and just look into each other's eyes for 2 or 3 minutes. Now, they will think I'm crazy, but we've got to get those mirror neurons activated. We got to get co-regulated, little things like that. And for a lot of couples, we'll take sex off the table, genitals off the table for at least a month as we're working on.
I hope the genitals are always off the table.
Well, I mean,
or at least wipe it down when you're done.
That's right. At least wipe it down. So Clorox wipes are always good. But because orgasm isn't always, I mean, sex is so much more than an orgasm. So trying to help them start pleasure mapping together where we don't want either one to feel vulnerable. So, or pressured, her thinking, oh my God, one more thing. Or maybe he thinks that. But just body mapping, holding hands, just that connection where you start coming back online, and then a month or so later, or maybe they spontaneously do it. I'm not grading them, but once they feel comfortable co-regulating, then experimenting with sex again. And even those first sex encounters, orgasm it's more tantric. It's not, orgasm is not the goal. Softening together is the goal.
Yeah, I think it again comes back to the pyramid shape of that SPIES model, is that when we get to that pinnacle of the social, again, it's not an orgasm at the top of that. It is that deeper social connection that we all desire.
Absolutely.
So with that kind of in mind, do you believe the human life is moving towards something? And if so, what? Getting off the sex piece and getting into a little bit more deeper spiritual kind of approach.
Could be moving towards an orgasm. No, I'm teasing. Yeah. I think so. I think we're moving towards evolvement. Whatever that evolvement might be, I think there has to be an upper power of some sort that we're moving towards. For me, in my life, or I'm going to have an existential crisis of some sort.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I come originally from a geology background before I got my Ph.D. in exercise physiology. And I'm a big fan of the French Jesuit priest, paleontologist, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And he speaks of what he calls the omega point. But all of his writings really go from that more geological kind of perspective of evolution and going from a physical evolution to a spiritual evolution.
Yeah.
And I love that you used that kind of phrasing, because I think that's what we're undergoing. We as a species we've developed consciousness,
right,
and now we're moving towards something deeper. And I think there's a lot of friction that comes with that. I mean, I think I'm optimistic in where we are right now as a society. As crazy as things are, I think that's the friction, the tension that we have that is going to push us or propel us forward in terms of our growth as a human species. So I agree with you that we're evolving towards something greater.
Yeah.
What that is, I think, is up to us to choose.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's see. What else did I need to ask you? Well, let's just, one of the questions, and we'll come back. Well, first, before I ask my kind of final question I usually ask, where can our viewers and listeners connect with you, find the upcoming book, and when is that released?
Oh, it was released April 6th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little bit later than that. So it's already out there. So it's not an up and coming book or forthcoming book. It is now a book that is out there. Where can they find it? Where can they connect with you and learn more about you?
Yeah, great. My website, I actually have 2 podcasts that go with each of my books. My books are there. Everything is linked on my website. I've got a couple of freebies, a quiz, and a way to reignite your desire in 72 hours. But everything's on the website.
You can't do it quicker than 72 hours?
Well, I do have
I mean, I need something now. No.
I've got overachievers.
Okay. So we'll make sure that that's in the description notes so people can connect with that. But I like to end the conversations on this podcast with pretty much the same question. If someone listening right now or watching the podcast feels scattered or fragmented, as so many people do, what is one step that they could take during this week to begin becoming more centered?
I use this. I'm an EMDR therapist, so people get dissociated as we're working on that real deep work, and so I think this is a great way to immediately get yourself regrounded. Name 5 things you see, because you're telling your nervous system, "Oh, I'm right here." Name 4 things you hear. Name 3 things you feel. Name 2 things you taste. And well, no, 1 thing you taste, 2 things that you can feel with your feet. I want to get them to their the soles of their feet, get that root chakra back online. But that's a great way if you're feeling really disconnected. Or breathe in for 4, hold for 5, exhale for 6 with a noise. Oh, because your vagal tone, vagus nerve runs through your throat. And I was doing that at 3 years old. I didn't even know that was a thing, but,
Oh, wow.
but that can help immediately get you grounded. Or pop a lemon drop, or a real sharp taste in your mouth can help you get grounded too.
Great advice. Was there anything we failed to talk about today that you want to make sure that we get out to our viewers and listeners?
No, I think we covered a lot of things.
We did?
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. You gave me some things to work on. My wife is on a business trip right now. In fact, my daughter, I have to take her to the train a little bit later. She's going to take the train up to Seattle. That's where she's planning on going to college. So my wife's working up in Seattle. They're going to connect and they're going to look for apartments for her for the coming year. And so it's kind of me and my son over the weekend. But, when she gets back, maybe I can charge things up a little bit more.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
So appreciate it. You put me into my Texas mode. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot. And just keep doing what you're doing. I love it.